Joining me now is our NBC News team. Steve Kornacki is at the big board to break down our latest poll. Dasha Burns is in Pennsylvania, where the former president is campaigning today. And senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has the latest on the Harris campaign. And Shaquille Brewster talking to voters in battleground Wisconsin. So, Steve, let's start with you. This, of course, our first NBC News poll since Harris became the Democratic nominee. Give us your biggest takeaways.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Obviously, you mentioned the headline, that 5-point advantage for Harris over Trump, but put this in some context. The previous polls we had, going back a year, when it was Biden versus Trump in our polling, look at what the results were. Very consistently, Trump led, Trump led, Trump led, Trump led, and there was a tie 1 year ago in September 2023. Now, 2 months after Biden exits, as you say, our first poll with Harris as the Democratic candidate, and Harris leads. First time you see a Democratic lead here. First time you see that Democratic number this high. This is 3 points better. Harris is 49 than Biden's best over the past year, 46. So it just illustrates how significantly things shifted when Harris replaced Biden as the Democratic candidate. And this is an interesting finding from the poll, too. It's interesting. Kamala Harris is the incumbent vice president in what remains an unpopular administration, but asking folks which candidate better represents change by a 47-38 margin. In our poll, they're saying Harris and not Trump, the former president.
So, Steve, what about the picture behind the numbers? What does that tell us?
Yeah, so take a look here. The gender gap, I think. One of the biggest stories here in this Harris lead in our poll, because look at this. Among men, Trump has a sizable lead. He's beating Harris by 12 points among men. Among women, Harris has a much more sizable advantage. Look at this. It's 21 points, 58-37 in Harris's favor among women. So you could see how that nets out in her favor, giving her that lead nationally. But also, just take this in some perspective here. That would be a gender gap, 21 and 12, of 33 points. Now, we talked in 2020, in 2016, about seeing historically high gender gaps in those presidential elections. This would obliterate those gender gaps. This has been a staple. The gender gap has been since 1980 of American politics. But if we see anything like a 33-point gender gap in November, that's absolutely off the charts, even by modern standards. And the other key finding here demographically, I think, break this down by race, it's among black voters, 85-7 Harris over Trump. Now, historically, this is what you'd call sort of a normal finding. Democrats have typically won the black vote by margins that look like this in presidential elections. Why this is significant is it did not look like this when Joe Biden was the Democratic candidate. Joe Biden was lagging. He was often in like the 60s among black voters in polling. There are still some polls out there that have Trump doing better than this with black voters, but I think you also saw a lot of polls that were Trump versus Biden, where Trump was in the mid-high teens among black voters, which it's a low number overall, but historically that would be very high for Republicans. So Democrats were very worried about the black vote and underperforming historically with Biden as their candidate. This poll, at least, that's not happening here.
A remarkably different race since the Democrats changed the top of the ticket. Steve Kornacki, thank you for that. So let's go now to Dasha, who is in Pennsylvania, as we mentioned. Dasha, despite trailing in the national head-to-head, voters still favor Trump on some key issues that they care about: immigration, the economy. Are we hearing him address any of those issues today?
Well, Ryan, these are the issues that his campaign, his allies really want him to focus on, to not get distracted, not get baited by the Harris campaign as he has in the past. So earlier today, he was at an event where he did focus on the economy. It was focused on farmers, talking about agriculture, talking about energy. Senate candidate Dave McCormick was there, who's running against Democrat Bob Casey, and the two of them really honing in on listening to the stories, the lived experience of those farmers, people who are in charge of our food production here in the state of Pennsylvania. So this was an economy-focused, farmer-focused message on this panel today. The question is, what are we going to hear at the rally tonight?
And, of course, he's going to head to the South, Georgia, and North Carolina next. We all know what's going on in North Carolina there. The gubernatorial pick mired in a scandal. This is someone that Trump has endorsed. The Harris campaign sees this as an opportunity in these eastern seaboard states. How concerned is the Trump campaign about Mark Robinson's role on the ticket?
Well, look, Harris had already narrowed the margins in North Carolina. It's a state that the former president won in 2016. and in 2020, but by a narrower margin. And now it's a really competitive race there. So really any number of things could tip the scales here. And there is concern among the former president's allies that Robinson could drag down the Trump-Vance ticket. Is why you've been hearing in our reporting that allies are trying to convince him to rescind his endorsement of Robinson. But we just have not seen that yet. And it doesn't sound like he's planning to do so, at least at this point.
And Donald Trump also appearing to reject the idea of another invitation to debate. Kamala Harris has said that she would debate that second debate in late October. Is this Trump just trying to, set the stage for more negotiations on this, or is this a done deal? We're all done seeing presidential debates.
Well, look, right after that first debate, you saw him go into the spin room, which was a surprise to everyone. And you heard him say, I don't think we need another one after this. And now he's really doubling down on that over the last few days since Harris made that announcement that she's accepting the debate with CNN on the 23rd. He has said time and time again that it's simply too late, he believes, to have another debate. But Ryan, for context, he did have debates in October in both 2016 and 2020. It was October 19th and 16, October 22nd, not so far from the 23rd, in 2020. And there's a long history dating back to 1960 of debates in the second or third week of October. So this would not be unusual, but it seems he's sticking to that line. But as we know, with former President Trump, he could at some point change his mind. Doesn't look like that right now, though, Ryan.
Yeah, nothing's ever a done deal completely, right? All right, let's move to Kelly at the White House. Kelly, Vice President Harris, she's going to spend her time in some Sun Belt states, Arizona and Nevada, over the weekend. What's her strategy for winning over voters there?
Well, one of the things we're seeing is that the campaign wants to demonstrate that not only is the blue wall, which is often associated with Democratic success in the upper Midwest, important, but they believe there is room in the Sun Belt to expand their support. And they'll be looking at some targeted approaches. In some places, as in Arizona, as example, there is outreach to the LDS community, the Mormon Church, to find those voters and to try to make an appeal. Also in Nevada, of course, union workers are very important, and there's been a lot of push in the hospitality industry, especially with how much Las Vegas is a magnet for international visitors as well as people from all over the U.S. So that's part of it. But the campaign is also clear to say they want to demonstrate that she will compete and work for votes in all of those critical battlegrounds, whether it's the Sun Belt, the blue wall states of the upper Midwest, and also key states like you were just discussing, North Carolina and also, of course, Georgia. So the battleground is clear, and how they're spending time is an important measure of where they think they can win. And the Harris campaign also says they don't believe that Donald Trump is showing that he is going to all of those places with the same degree of emphasis. That's another line they would like to show for contrast to voters.
Yeah, and Kelly, she's also very busy unveiling new policy proposals. We're expecting a new economic proposal on Wednesday. What do we know about those plans?
Well, interestingly, we don't know a lot at this point, and we've been talking to the campaign, awaiting details about what she will roll out, and they're not giving the specifics yet. We expect that that will happen in Pennsylvania, the important Commonwealth battleground, on Wednesday, and part of what they talk about is showing the contrast to Donald Trump, and we've already heard her talking about ways in which his views about tariffs, the Harris campaign believes, translates to attacks on middle Americans and middle-class Americans because of the higher rate of costs that can result from tariffs. So they will look to fight that argument. We know polling suggests that Donald Trump does well on the economy, and this is an area where being a part of the Biden-Harris administration may be a drag on some of her support because of all that has passed in these last 3.5, almost 4 years with inflation and concerns about costs of everyday goods and so forth. Inflation is down. Prices, to some degree, in certain sectors are coming down. And she will try to make the argument that she has ideas for how to incentivize and how to support first-time home buyers and small businesses. But the specifics, we're still waiting to see.
And, of course, we shouldn't forget about President Biden. He has a busy week. He's about to deplane in New York. He's going to deliver a speech at the UN General Assembly. He's also going to be on The View on Wednesday. It'll be his first sit-down interview since the Democratic Convention. How is the president preparing for all of this?
Well, certainly the UN General Assembly will be his last time to speak to this world body at a critical moment when there is a world on fire in certain parts. The Middle East is certainly in a position of great concern for the administration about an expanding war, ongoing concern for Ukraine. So it's an enormous platform where he will try to make an imprint on world leaders. And then going to The View is one of those opportunities, proximity, being there in New York, sitting with the ladies of that panel show. He's been there a number of times before, and it might be a chance to hear the president reflect not in a typical news environment or a speech environment, but to have more of a conversation and to perhaps reach a different audience. And embedded in that will be his effort to try to help Kamala Harris. He is certainly trying to campaign for her. This isn't billed as a campaign event, but certainly he'll want to make some of those messages known as well. Right?
Okay, Kelly O'Donnell at the White House, thank you for that. Now let's find out what voters are thinking. They're the ones that are ultimately going to decide all of this. Shaq, you're in a key swing county, in a key swing state. Tell us why Door County is so important.
Well, Ryan, this is one of those true bellwether counties. It has sided with the winner of the presidential election in every election going back to 1996. When you look at the demographics, you have a higher percentage of older voters, a large white working class group of voters here as well. And it's an area where you have votes very tight margins fairly routinely. I don't know if you can also tell behind me, it's also just a pretty beautiful area to be. Some people call it the Cape Cod of the Midwest. So we wanted to make sure we came here to talk to voters, these swing voters, to see how they felt.
And we've talked a lot about the apparent momentum.
I didn't hear what she'll bring to the country, but I just heard she's a candidate.
I'm surprised at how strong she is. I honestly kind of didn't know she was there for a few years because I didn't feel like she did a whole lot.
I was very negative about it. I just think she was like a nobody, didn't even know who she was. And she's done a reasonably good job of marketing.
I definitely have come to the conclusion that she's capable. I mean, and she's proved that in the debate, and she's proved that since then. So.
Would you have said that in July?
No.
Yeah, that's why we're struggling.
And you know, Ryan, those conversations that you just heard, they reflect the sentiment that we saw in the new NBC News poll, that historic rise in favorability for Vice President Harris. That's something that I've heard from voters here as well. Even those who say that they're not ultimately going to vote for her, don't side with her, don't love her policies or the Democratic Party, they say that they view her, many of them, fundamentally differently than they did back in July, Ryan.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable that the interview you just played was pretty revealing about kind of the thought process that some of these voters are going through. Was it your sense that they became more familiar with her and more comfortable with her just because she got to the top of the ticket, or was it her debate performance? Was it a combination of both? Talk me through the thought process of some of these voters.
It's a combination of both, and it really depends on which voter you're talking to. For many of them who said that they didn't have a positive opinion or view of her in the past, they pointed directly to that debate performance. They liked what they saw from her. They got to hear from her for the very first time. For others who said that they were already planning to vote for President Biden, they're traditionally Democratic voters, what it did was tick up the enthusiasm that they had for this ticket. You know, the Harris campaign actually reached out to us earlier today. They saw we were here doing this reporting, and they said that in this county alone, they've had more than 300 new volunteer signups since Harris moved to the top of the ticket. And that just shows you it's not just about winning people over, but it's about building that enthusiasm. While that number doesn't sound like an astronomical amount, it represents about 1% of the population in this county. When you have those tight margins, as you see in Door County regularly, as you see in the state, in Wisconsin regularly, that can ultimately make a difference.
Yeah, in a race that is so tight, in a race that we thought was already baked, everybody had already made up their mind. It is very interesting to hear voters talk to you in real time about how they're changing their minds. Shaq Brewster, thanks for being out there, man. We appreciate it as always.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.